Svelte is a powerhouse. Over the past 4 years, it's been growing faster than almost any other web development framework. Why is that? Well, according to the State of JavaScript survey, developers love it. It has incredibly high retention scores, and on other surveys, it has incredibly high satisfaction scores. It's got a great developer experience and helps you build really fast websites very quickly and easily with a pleasant developer experience. So if you want to learn more about why developers love Svelte so much, come with me. We're going to go over everything you need to know about Svelte and SvelteKit, and you'll come out of this with all the skills you need to build your own website. In this tutorial, we're actually going to go ahead and move from Svelte into SvelteKit, and we're going to use SvelteKit to build an entire website using Svelte. And because this website will be pre-rendered and it'll have optimized images, it'll have good SEO, it's going to be really performant, it's going to use all the modern best practices, and it's just going to be a really great modern, simple website. So we're going to get started with that. And to do so, we're actually going to use a boilerplate from Prismic. So Prismic is a CMS, which means it just handles the content for your website. If you've ever built a website, you probably know that handling the content is one of the hardest parts. You have questions like, are you going to write it in Markdown and then compile it to HTML, or are you going to hard code it in HTML, or are you going to use a database? So Prismic offers a very tailored integration with Svelte and SvelteKit so that you can easily author rich dynamic content in the Prismic platform and inject it into your app really easily. You can focus on building your components and creating your layouts and then just getting content seamlessly from Prismic. The concepts we're going to go over in this tutorial are all totally agnostic, so if you want to use a different CMS or a different content solution altogether, please feel free. You're not bound to this. But I'm just going to get started with this boilerplate so that we can start diving into SvelteKit. So I'm going to log into Prismic. And then I'm going to create a new project using SvelteKit. Select SvelteKit here. It's going to offer me a few options to get started. If you want to learn more about Prismic and SvelteKit for that matter, I totally recommend that you come and give the full website demo a try. This will show off a lot of the features, and it gives you a really beautiful starter website which you can customize. In this case, we're going to go with the minimal starter. This just gives us a bare bones skeleton boilerplate with the configuration done for us. Let's call this Cool Demo 2023. And then not worry about anything else. We got unlimited usage for one user on a free plan, so that's fine. We'll go with that. And create the repository. Now in the meantime, I'm going to open up my terminal because we're going to need it to launch this project. So Prismic has this platform that operates in the cloud on prismic.io. This is where you author your content, and it's called the Page Builder. But you do all your development, of course, locally on your machine. So how do you connect this cloud platform to the work that you're doing on your local machine? That's with a tool called Slice Machine. So we are going to use this starter project, which has Slice Machine configured. We'll just copy paste this in here. And this will download Slice Machine, it will download the starter project, and it'll do a lot of configuration and plumbing for us. So it'll inject the repository name into the config. It will push some of the schemas from the project up to the cloud. And it will connect to the API for us, so we don't need to do any of that. We'll be able to just dive in and start coding. Okay, so that's all done. We don't need to open the repository because we actually already have it open here, so I'm just going to click no. And then cd cool demo 23, and let's open this in VS Code. We can close out our terminal now. In the meantime, here, I've finished running this command, so I'm going to click I'm done. Okay, so now that we got the project installed, let's just do a little tour of the code base here, since we got a lot of files to get through. So first of all, we got our config files. Full disclosure, you won't have to touch these. The most likely one that you would ever have to touch is the Svelte config, but you actually don't have to because of this really cool adapter property. Basically, you need to configure your project to be deployed in a certain environment, whether that's Vercel or Cloudflare or Netlify. But the SvelteKit team has built an automatic adapter, so it actually detects the environment and then automatically does the configuration for that environment for you. So you don't need to use the Svelte config. Svelte uses Vite for its server, for its dev server and its SSR and pre-rendering and everything. You don't need to touch the Vite config. It's very powerful. Like you could do a lot of things with Vite, but we're not going to touch it. Slice machine.config. So this is the one from Prismic. Again, you don't need to touch this. The adapter in this case is just an adapter to say that we're using a special plugin to work with SvelteKit, but don't need to do anything here. So that's the config files. The static folder, it's kind of cool. That's where you can place assets that you don't want to be bundled or transformed by SvelteKit. So that might be like, for instance, your favicon. Maybe you have images or fonts or anything like that. So you can put those in the static folder, and SvelteKit will serve them directly. But all of the work we're going to be doing today is going to happen in the source directory. The source directory is where you put everything that SvelteKit is going to actually like bundle and transform for you. And the first file in the source directory that we are concerned with is the app.html. Again, this is another file that you don't actually have to touch, but this is the root HTML element that SvelteKit is going to inject your whole application into. In theory, if you wanted to, you could put some stuff in the head here, but it's really not advisable because Svelte and SvelteKit actually have better ways of doing that kind of thing. So we're not going to touch that. What we are going to touch is in lib and routes. The lib directory is pretty cool. The lib directory is where you put anything that you're going to reuse across your project. So when I'm building with SvelteKit, I put my components in the lib directory. And then if I want to pull out my FAQ component or whatever, I just import it from the lib directory. And SvelteKit gives you this nice alias. So you can say import from $lib/components or whatever. And you just have things kind of handily there for you. In this case, Prismic uses a concept that we call slices to architect your website. So slices are components. They're components that make up kind of a horizontal section of your website. So Slice Machine is actually going to create these slice components for you, and it will put them in the lib directory. We'll come back here later on to edit these, but for now, you can just know that they're kind of safely here for you. You can put utilities here too. Prismic.io.js. This is your API config. You don't need to worry about most of this for now. The main thing is to know that this is where we define our route structure, but we won't worry about that in this tutorial because we're actually going to use this route, the route structure that's been provided for us. So the routes directory has this preview folder in it, which is kind of a special thing, and I'll explain that in a minute. But for now, let's just look inside that. And inside we have a page.svelte file, page.server.js file, and a UID folder. The page.svelte file, or rather plus page.svelte, is probably the most important file in SvelteKit. This is how you actually define a page. And the first plus page.svelte file at the top of your routes folder, that's your home page. Then if you want to have like an about page, you would create an about folder. And inside the about folder, you would put a plus page.svelte file. That one would be your about page. So the path for the file is the name of the enclosing folder, like /about or whatever. And a plus page.svelte file looks basically like a Svelte component. In this case, we've got this slice zone, which comes from Prismic, which is rendering our page. Plus page.server.js, that's a file that lives next door to your plus page.svelte, and it's where your page.svelte file actually gets its data from. So this is where you do your async querying. So you might access the file system, you might access a database. So in this case, we're initializing a client. So in this case, we're initializing a API client from Prismic. And then we are using that API client to query the home page from the Prismic repository. And then we're returning a bunch of data, the page content, as well as some metadata for SEO. And then we provide that to the Svelte component in this data prop, where we say export let data. That's where we are passing the API data. So let's take a look at how this all looks by running the app in dev mode. You can see that this dev command is actually running two different processes here. One is Vite dev. That is the development server for the SvelteKit application. The other is Slice Machine. That is our developer tool, which is going on behind the scenes. That's what we're going to use to make components in Prismic. We won't look at Slice Machine just yet. For now, we'll just take a peek at our Vite app, or our SvelteKit app. So here's what it looks like. This is content that's being delivered from the Prismic API. So this content gets queried here from the API, and then it gets passed to the page component as this data prop, and then the data prop gets passed to the slice zone component, which renders the page. It's pretty miraculous, so there's not actually much UI code here. It's mostly at this point just plumbing to get the data from one place to another. But once we get the data out, it actually renders a whole web page like this, which is really cool. And we're going to look more at how that works in a minute. But you can see we've got a home page, and then we've got an internal link here. This links to another page. And the URL here is /another page. Where does that URL come from, right? Because if you look at the routing structure here, there's no folder called another page. There's no file called another page either. What's happening is this folder, which is square bracket UID, square bracket. The square brackets denote that the segment UID is dynamic. So we're not actually looking for UID, we're looking for anything. And then we're going to render this page, but we're going to render it with the segment that's provided. So in this case, that segment is another page. So when SvelteKit loads that page, it runs this load function. The load function receives a param, which is another page. That's stored in the params.uid property, which we use to fetch a document from the Prismic API, a page document with the param of another page, and then we return it. So when we load this page, SvelteKit runs this load function, which receives a bunch of properties. One of those properties is a params object. The params object contains all of the dynamic route segments as properties. So we have the params.uid segment, which in this case is equal to another page. So we use that data to fetch a page with the UID of another page from the Prismic repository and then return it and render it, right? So that's how we're dynamically rendering a page, and we can create pages with any UID or any URL and render them all dynamically using this same page. This is possible because we have this dynamic route segment. And the SvelteKit has a handful of useful conventions for creating routes. So another one, the one that we've been staring at this whole time, is double bracket preview equals preview, which might look a little bit weird. You can actually totally ignore it, except you should understand what it is and why it's there. What this is going to do is create basically a second version of your website under the /preview URL. This version of your website, when you load it, either in local development or in production, it will check to see if there's a preview cookie present in the machine, and it will fetch like draft version of the content that corresponds to that preview cookie if it's available. Otherwise, this version is just going to get statically rendered, and it will be served super fast by SvelteKit, and it'll just show you the live version of the content. What this preview equals preview segment does is it says, is there a segment called /preview? If so, let's render it with the preview data. If not, then just serve a pre-rendered or a statically generated version of the page. So as I said, you can ignore that. The other thing that you need to know is that we have this params folder with a preview.js file that exports what SvelteKit calls a matcher. And this is how we define the pattern for what this directory should match. But again, you can ignore that. This is just some of the cool stuff that's possible with SvelteKit. Okay, now we're actually going to just start doing some coding. And we're going to start by applying some general styling to the website. I'm going to use a library that I've been playing with a little bit lately called OpenProps. OpenProps is a really nice way to do styling. npm I OpenProps. It just provides hundreds of CSS variables that you can use to style your content. So the layout file is another important file in SvelteKit. The layout file will wrap your entire application in some code. So in this case, it's providing some logic to render some SEO information, and then it opens a main element, and then it injects the application with this slot tag here. The slot tag represents kind of the web page itself, and it injects it there. And then it also uses this Prismic preview component, which helps with the previewing we talked about earlier, just by injecting some scripts and stuff. We can also use the layout file to add some like global styles. You'll remember earlier how we do styles in Svelte. Just put a style tag and then write your CSS as per usual. So we can say background pink here, and that will turn our background pink as expected. And we get Vite, gives us the very fast hop module reloading here. OpenProps is cool because it actually just offers you hundreds of CSS variables you can use kind of like utilities. So you import that just like this, OpenProps. I'm going to import their styles. I'm also going to import, let's add some semicolons. I'm going to add their CSS reset, and I'm going to add, they have a special library for HSL, or special add-ons for different types of colors. I'm going to copy in some font here to declare a font face. And anytime I copy paste anything, I'll make sure that you can get a link to it in the description. And then I've got some color scheme stuff here, which we're going to use. So I'm just going to copy paste this in. Here we're just defining some color variables. This is an OpenProps variable where you just say var red 6, gray 9. It just makes the variables very declarative like that, which is nice. Let's add a dark mode, which is what I'm going to do next. Just copy pasting in a dark mode here. There we go. My computer's set to dark mode. But I should be able to emulate. Oops, let's move this down. Emulate color scheme, first color scheme. So there you go. That's what it'll look like in light mode. Now in Svelte, you always have this global pseudo selector, which you can use. And I'm going to use that to target the root, the HTML element, and set override one of the variables from OpenProps. I'm going to set my serif font to Anton, and then I'm going to globally set my main font family to just the System Sans font. Now I've got that font Anton downloaded on my machine, but I'll include a link to it in the description. I'm just going to add it to my static folder here. So I've now got that font loaded, and our website is going to be made up of slices. So this is one slice. It's a section of the website. And each slice we're going to wrap in a HTML section element like this. So I'm just going to globally target all section elements to give them a little bit of styling. Ooh, there we go. This is just some basic layout stuff. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of dynamic styling and just say if the slice is an even child, give it one background. If the slice is an odd child, give it another background. And then we should get a background here. Perfect. So that'll just give us a little bit of, it'll mix things up a little bit for us. Now we've got this slice here. Let's go play around with that. So this is in the lib directory, as we saw earlier. This came with the project boilerplate, and we're just going to customize it a little bit. It's this slice component file, which is labeled with index.svelte. So what's going on in this component? Prismic.io/svelte is a package that was automatically installed in the boilerplate, and it exports a rich text component, so that will render rich text from Prismic. It also will like do some dynamic stuff. Like in this case, we're importing another component and we're using that component to handle certain types of elements, in this case, the label element. So we're going to add a little bit more layout to this. We're going to wrap it in a div with a class of text. And then we're going to add a little bit of CSS to just say, we'll actually override this, just delete the container rule there, and just say text.text width 100%, and then we'll say max width, and we'll use a variable from openprops, size content 3. Save that, and now we've got a bit more of a layout happening here. So this is a little bit what it's like to do some coding in Svelte. Now we're going to hop over to Slice Machine to work on our Prismic content models. So Slice Machine, when we did our npm run dev here, Slice Machine automatically ran on localhost 9999. And this is what Slice Machine looks like. So Slice Machine is interface for managing content models for your Prismic project. So this will generate components in your SvelteKit project, create models for those components, for the data for those components, save those models, and then it'll push those models to Prismic where you can use them to create content. And that way you have everything typed safely so that you can create content to Prismic that respects the types and the structures of your code in Svelte. So for starters, let's open, this is the model that we have for our basic document, which is a page. Let's open that. And then, so currently there's one slice component that you can use in the page, which is the rich text one. We're going to add some more here so that you're going to be able to create pages with all sorts of different cool slices. So we'll create a new one from scratch. Call it hero text. And you can see this actually created a component in our code here. Let's widen this up a little bit. Add a new field, rich text, and let's call this title. Then let's edit it and only allow H1. Then let's add a new field. We'll call it subtitle. We'll edit it and we'll only allow paragraph elements. Then we'll save that. And Slice Machine will actually simulate this component for us live in real time as we're editing it. So this is a live rendering of the component. And right now you can see we just got this placeholder text here, placeholder component. So that's all that's rendering. But we could put in some stuff here, like we could say H1 test. And you can see we've got a live rendering happening. The slice receives all the data. So this is mock data, which is just to simulate what the editing experience will be like when you actually use it in the cloud. Mock data or real data, either way, it receives that data through the slice prop, which is export let slice. We haven't talked very much about props yet, but this is how props are defined in Svelte and SvelteKit, is with export let. So when you create a component, you can declare a prop with export let, and then when you use that prop, you can say, you know, slice equals whatever and deliver the content that way. So in this case, let's delete that. Let's delete this placeholder content. Prismic gives us a rich text component, which we looked at earlier. We will do an import of that. Let's close this up. And then it has a field property, and we're going to give it slice dot primary dot title. Save that. Oops. Don't know how that happened. There we go. And now We've got a live rendering of the slice. And we want the subtitle too. So we'll say Prismic rich text and field equals slice.primary.subtitle. And something that I love is that all of your content is automatically typed, which is why you get these suggestions as you're typing, because it actually knows the structure of your content. Hero. Now this is supposed to be hero text, so it should look kind of cool. So let's add a style tag. We're just going to style the whole thing, the section, and we're going to use some props from OpenProps. So they offer this really nice gradient images, which are like background images. And they also offer these cool noise filters. So let's first do that. There we go, got a cool gradient background. And then let's add some more noise. There we go. Background size, cover, text, transform, uppercase, display, flex, direction, row, align items, flex, start, justify, content, center, gap. Again, let's use the open prop sizing, which is nice and consistent. Size 4, padding, var, size 14, 0, var, size 13, and font family, var, font serif. So this is the Anton font, which we loaded earlier. So now we've got some styles on the text here. This demo website that we're doing is inspired by the Svelte Summit website. So we're going to make this like an event website. Let's give it a name, Coding Camp, the most fun in code, something like that. Then we want to style the text itself, but you can see the text is rendered by the rich text component, so you can't access it directly because the styles are scoped. So what we need to do is drill down into the scoped styling. And we can do that by specifying the section tag, which will be scoped to this component, and then using the global selector. So we're globally selecting anything that's a descendant of this component, which is pretty cool. So we're going to globally select any H1s that are descendants of this specific component. And then we'll say color var red, 5, text align right, font size var size 11, line height var size 11, width min content to make it as narrow as possible. There we go. Boom. Then let's do the same for our p tag, section global p. Color, let's just make it a black, text align left, font size var size 7, font family var font serif, color var, oops, we got two colors here. Let's ignore that one. Font size var, we got a bunch of duplicates here. Line height 120%, width min content. Font's a little small. Let's make that a little bigger. There we go. Let's shorten our tagline. Dev fun. There we go. We can actually save the mock content so that we can use this mock content as we continue developing. And that's our slice. So the content of the slice is dynamic, right? So we've coded it here with this content here, but we can change this content in the mock editor. And also when we push it to Prismic, to the cloud, it won't take this mock content with it. When we create content in the cloud editor, in the page builder, we'll add our own content. So we'll be able to reuse this slice as much as we want, use it on different pages and everything. So this is purely just a development environment. So next, we're going to get into some of Svelte's really popular features. We're going to use some of the conditional rendering logic in Svelte. Let's go back to Slice Machine. Go back to our page, add a new slice, create new. We're going to create a slice called card list. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a component that displays a list of cards, and we're going to use conditional logic to display them. We're going to create a component that displays a list of cards. We're going to use conditional logic to loop over it and make some variations depending on the content. So let's edit this. Here, we'll add a field called heading that only accepts an H2. So the repeatable zone is where you want to put content that can be repeated in an array. So all the properties that we put here will form one object, and then when you're editing it, you'll be able to duplicate that object and add unique properties each time. So let's create title property with an H3 enabled. Let's create a description property with P enabled. An image. And we have this simple plain text field called key text. We'll just use that for a name. Save that. And let's see what it looks like. So far, of course, doesn't look like anything. Slice Machine has created the component for us in our code base, so we can go over here, delete the placeholder content. Then let's put in that heading that we saw earlier. So we'll use Prismic rich text, auto import that. Again, we got this funny little asterisk, not sure what that's about. Field equals slice.primary.heading. Here we go, we've got heading. Now next, we have all of these properties which repeat, and we don't want to access them directly, we want to loop over them to use them. So we're going to use Svelte's each block. So the each block will loop over an array and render a template for each item in the array. We could do like dog, cat, mouse, as animal, and then we could say like H4 animal. There you go, dog, cat, mouse. But what we actually want is each slice.items as item. What we actually want is each slice.items as card, because each item is going to be one card. And then also Svelte will give us the index of the item in the array, which we can use later on. So let's just pocket that. Then let's use an article element for each card. We'll give it a class of card. And then we'll put a header for the card. And we'll use rich text again. Field equals card.title. Let's see, is that starting to come together? There we go. We've got one element here, but we can add another one. Yeah, there we go. Starting to come together. Now let's style this. First, we've got these cards, so we'll display them as a grid. And use the classic grid templating, repeat, auto fit, min max 200, 1FR. So that should give us a classic card layout. Oops, what I meant to do is put a there we go. So now we've got a cards tag on there. And then gap, we'll use open props again, size 8 and max width 900 pixels. Now we're starting to get a bit of a grid layout happening. And then let's style the cards themselves. This is just some aesthetics. Of course, nothing groundbreaking here. We're still using open props. How's this looking? There we go, starting to look like cards. And then a little bit of layout for the card content. Display flex, direction, column, align items left, gap. So now we've got some styling, some layout for what we've got inside the cards. Now let's actually put a little bit more in there. So we'll do so in the body of the card, we'll put the card's description, rich text field equals card.description, typo. And then we'll give the card a footer. We're going to use another component, Prismic image. Did that import correctly? Yep, we're good. Field equals card.image. So this Prismic image, I love. It gives you an image that is optimized for the size. It's automatically formatted for the size of that's displayed. It's also automatically compressed and optimized, so it serves like WebP if WebP is supported in the browser. So this gives you basically the fastest possible image served from an image CDN, which I think is just incredible value. If you tried to optimize images yourself, it's it's a lot of work. And then let's create an H4. We've got this little plain text string for the name of the card. So we're going to put that there. There we go. Add a little bit more styling, footer, just a little space, margin top, auto, display, flex, dirt, flex, direction, row, align items, center, gap, var, size 3, and then put some styling on that image, footer. Again, we have to use the global pseudo selector to target the image because it's wrapped in a component. And we're just going to make it a small, 50 pixels, height, 50 pixels, object fit cover, and border radius radius round. So open props will just give us the round border for that, which we could do ourselves, but it's nice. Somebody else is doing it for us. There we go. Now let's actually put some real content in here. Lorem ipsum dolorcit. We've got some lorem here, lorem 2. There we go. Just got a short code programmed for that. We can get placeholder images sourced straight from Unsplash. Let's see. Let's go for blueberries. And let's say Ernest Hemingway, Zelda Fitzgerald. I didn't mention this, but the image component will also automatically handle your alt text for you, which is really nice. Super important. And we can add more cards. So let's say, let's put some lorem in here. Nulla pentaskew. And who else have we got here? Elizabeth Bronte. And we got this card layout happening, which is pretty nice. Now cards are really super useful. So rather than just stopping here, I think let's create some variants on this card component so that we can reuse this component in different contexts. Let's go back to the card list, close the simulator, and we'll add a new variation here. Let's call it header image. I'm just going to duplicate it. We have a default variation already, so we're just going to duplicate the default variation and then make some changes to it. So now we can choose whether or not we want to edit the default or the one with the header image. And then on this header image one, we're not going to need the name, so let's just save that like that. And now let's simulate this again. And you can see we're now simulating another version, the header image one, which doesn't have a name property. We can switch back and forth. We got the default. And we got this one. These are using the same component. They're both using the same card list component here, but we can now conditionally render the content of the card based on the variation. So let's go back up to the template. And we're going to conditionally hide or show the footer. So we'll say if slice.variation is equal to default. So the if block is how we do conditional logic. And then we'll say in the header, if slice.variation is equal to header image. Oops. And then we'll say if slice.variation is equal to header image, then we're going to put an image at the top of up here, card.image. So we're just saying let's put the image in the header instead of in the footer and not show any footer. There we go. This guy looks sharp. Now I'm just going to copy in some styles to style the header image. And then earlier when we were first looking at Svelte components, we were talking about how you can use inline styles. So we're going to add some fun styling using Svelte and open props. Here we can just pass styles directly to our image. So we'll say style, border, radius, And then we're using this open props variable. And open props has a selection of blob radiuses to create blobby shapes. And normally you would identify them with like var radius blob 3. But in this case, Svelte's going to let us inject the ID of the radius. And we can say, put some JavaScript in here. Index modulo 5 plus 1. The index is the index of the item. So we're looping over these items, and each one has an index, and then we're just numbering them 1 through 5 as we loop over them, and using that blob radius, 1 through 5. And here we go. We got this cool shape radius. Let's get another one. Let's see what it looks like when we have a few. Strawberry, some lorem. Don't need that much. Let's take half of it. Orange with some lorem. Apple with some lorem. There you go. So now with just a little bit of tweaking, we've got this variant. And then let's take it a little bit further, because there's no end to how much we could customize this. Let's come back here and add a new Boolean field. We'll just call it wide, so we can make the cards wide or not. Save this content, but then let's refresh to get the new property. And we're going to use another Svelte operator. This is the $sign operator. So typically, if I say let count equal 0, Svelte will track count, and if it changes, it'll update the DOM for me. So I can programmatically make those changes. But if I say let items equal apples 0, if I use items.apples in my template, and then 0 changes, it won't update, because Svelte can't track all of the changes in all the nested objects in the DOM. It's just too resource intensive. It's basically not possible. So instead, we have to specifically tell Svelte if there's a nested property that we want to keep an eye on. We identify that property for Svelte, and then Svelte will track it for us. In this case, we're going to destructure a property from the slice.primary.wide. And so we're saying, take this property out, and if it changes, just make sure to update the DOM. And then here, we're just going to use Svelte's class shorthand. So the class shorthand, all it does is if variable wide is equal to true, it applies a class with the same name as the variable. So it's going to apply a class called wide only if wide is equal to true. Then we can use that to style. So let's say cards.wide, grid template columns, and I'm going to make this a little wider. And then we'll increase the padding on our cards. And then we'll change the header layout a little bit because we got more space, so we can do that. And then just change the spacing around the image a little bit. Wide, header, global, image, margin, 0. And now we've got a whole new layout. So we've taken this one component, and by adding some conditional logic using the if block and using the class shorthand, we've now got 3 different layouts, which are pretty dramatically different, I think. We've got these cards. I imagine using these for something like conference talks or articles or something. Then we've got these cards, which are like nice for like, just like if you wanted to display features. Then we've got these cards, which you could use for like actually like offering instructions or something, you know? And it's nice because they're just slight variations on the same component, they all carry the same vibe, the same kind of branding, right? So even though they're functionally very different, if you use them in different places on your website, it maintains this cohesive sense of identity. And of course, if you change styling in one place, if you change the color of the text or the spacing or whatever, it's going to change it for all of these variations, which is really nice. I think if there's one thing SvelteKit does really well, it's form handling. Personally, I find form handling to usually be kind of a pain. HTML forms are just potentially so complex, and then you have to handle your API request and your backend logic, and you need to make sure it all works in different platforms. Well, SvelteKit encourages you to do this in a really logical way. What they start with is all forms are HTML first, JavaScript second. They use the philosophy of progressive enhancement. So when you create a form, you make sure that it will work for basically anyone, even if the JavaScript doesn't load. This is a large part of Svelte's philosophy, is that your application should work in kind of the minimum viable way, which means that if you have JavaScript disabled, or if you have a firewall that's blocking scripts, or if you load the website but you're on a slow connection, maybe you're in an elevator, maybe you're in an old apartment, maybe you're on a train or something, or out in the woods. If for whatever reason your JavaScript doesn't load, the website should still function. And so in SvelteKit, routing still functions without JavaScript. If JavaScript is present, it'll do the really nice seamless client-side navigation, but if JavaScript isn't present, it will default back to just standard multi-page app functionality, which is where you click a link and it loads a new document and you get a flash of white on the screen. And everyone's very terrified of it in the modern era, and that's why we have React and Vue and Svelte and everything. But it's important to know that that functionality is actually preferable in some cases because it just works. Whereas if you have a whole bunch of JavaScript in the front of your application, there's a very good chance that it will just break. So Svelte embodies this philosophy of progressive enhancement, and that really comes to the fore in form handling, which is what we're going to explore now. So we're going to create a new slice. Let's close this. And then let's go to back to our page. Add a new slice, which we're going to call contact form. And we're going to hard code the fields for this form. So we only actually need 2 properties, which is just going to be a heading and a description. Let's add these quickly. Heading, unselect all, H2. Add new field, text description. Unselect all P, save that. We've got the component now generated in our code base, and I'm going to copy paste in some code here so that you don't have to watch me type out a ton of HTML. So what we've got here is the rich text components displaying our heading and description. And then we've got an old school HTML form. The method on the form is post, which means it's creating information when we click submit. And action is where we start getting into the sveltiness of it. It's telling the form to send this to an endpoint at, in this case, the root of our application, the home page, basically. And we'll handle that logic in a minute. Then we've just got an email input and a text area input because it's a contact form, and a submit button. Then I just got some styling for the form. There we go. So we can say contact. Don't need that much introduction to our contact form. It's just a simple classic contact form. We can't actually enter any input because the slice simulator here, it blocks input, but that's okay. We'll play with it later. Now let's go to the root of our app, which is our page.server.js. So this is the function that handles data loading for the root of the application, the homepage of the application. We're going to use this same root to accept this post request. First of all, we're actually going to disable pre-rendering here because you can't pre-render. You can't pre-render a API endpoint. Obviously, something dynamic has to happen on an API endpoint, so you can't pre-render it. So we'll turn off pre-rendering entries. That's a pre-rendering situation, so we'll disable that. And then we're going to import some utilities from Svelte. We've got fail from sveltejs/kit and import dev from app/environment. Then this is what handles loading data for our home page. And this will handle the post request for our contact form. And I'm putting it at the root of the website just because we don't know where the contact form is going to be. It might be on the about page or the contact page, or it might be nested somewhere else. So we could create like an API area, but for now, just for ease, I'm just putting it at the root of the app to kind of signal that it's going to handle stuff across the app. So default, this means that by default, when an action comes in, it's going to get handled by the default handler. We could actually give our action a name, but we won't worry about that right now. Then we, because it's an HTML form, we need to parse the form data as you do with standard HTML, and then fetch the email and the message, which are the two fields that we have in our form, email, message. And then all I'm doing here is mocking an API request. So this is not an active API endpoint, but all you have to do is update this to your own API endpoint, and you'll be sending a post request with the email and the message, and posting those wherever, to your database or to your Slack channel or whatever you want to do. Then because we're going to play with the loading state, I'm just simulating a loading state. We're waiting 1 second before we respond. And then if this has failed, then we're going to throw an error, which is what the fail utility from Svelte does. Otherwise, we're just going to return a property success true. And this property is actually going to come back to the component that we're using. So this is actually all you need for a form to work in Svelte. We've got our action, and we've got the component with the form in it. However, you can't actually edit content in this form because it's in the slice simulator. Events are prevented here. So we're actually going to hop over to the editor. So the first thing that we're going to do is go to the Changes tab, and we're going to, you can see we've got a bunch of changes staged here, which are changes that we've done locally, but they don't exist yet in the Prismic repository. So click the Push Changes button to push all of those changes up to the repository. Now, all these models that we've been working on will be accessible in the cloud, and you'll be able to use them to actually make documents. Okay, now we've pushed all our changes. We're going to open our Prismic repository, which you can open from this button here. This is what it looks like. We've got, now Now that we've got these changes, we're going to open our Prismic repository, which you can open from this button here. You can also just go to prismic.io and access your account, and you'll be able to find it from the dashboard. Now open the first document here, the homepage document. And actually, this is looking a little bit empty. We've got this empty thumbnail here. So let's fix that. In Prismic, we have live previews. I'm just going to deploy to Vercel, set up and deploy. Yes, deploy to my personal. Okay, there we go. We're all good, just accepting all the defaults. And I'm just using the Vercel CLI to deploy this to Vercel. This won't give me continuous integration, so as I make changes in Prismic or in GitHub, they won't be reflected on the website. I'd have to redeploy manually. So I would actually recommend deploying via GitHub so that you get continuous deployment, and then using a Prismic webhook, which you can find in the Prismic documentation, to trigger redeploys on Vercel when you make changes in Prismic. But for now, just for ease, we're just going to use the CLI to get this online. And the reason for that is because earlier we were using the simulator. So this is a Prismic feature, a slice machine feature, where we create a route in the app. And in this case, it came as part of the starter. It's this slice simulator route. You don't really need to look at it. You don't need to understand what it does, but basically it just takes all your slices and it handles rendering them for different uses. So here we get a preview of the slice in development. But the other cool thing is that you can get previews of your slices in the editor, which is the reason we deployed this. So here we've got it deployed now on Vercel. Let's see if that worked. Yep. All right. I'm going to remove the ID so that I get a permalink for this deploy for this site. And then this should work if I open settings and paste in this URL /slice simulator, because that's where my slice simulator is located. What do I mean by that? If I go here, this is this route on my app, which was generated automatically. And if I try to access it from the browser, I just get this little plain text message saying like, you don't need to come to this page. But if I query it from an API, there's actually an iframe, a sort of hidden iframe that I can access, which will serve up live renderings of my slices. And then I get this live thumbnail of my content, and you can see I can actually edit it in real time. And I got live renderings of my slice components. So this is really great for understanding what your website will look like. And the way slices work is they just kind of stack like this, right? So it gives you a really nice mental model for understanding how to build a website, because websites are naturally built out of these kinds of blocks. That's why in HTML we have block elements. They just kind of stack one on top of each other like this. And so if you are a technical person, it maps to your understanding of how websites work with block elements. If you're not a technical person, for instance, if you're working with a marketer or a marketing team, this gives them a really intuitive way to understand. It looks kind of like a PowerPoint presentation or something, which is actually a really strong mental model for understanding how to create a website. A web page is kind of like a slide presentation in that every section of the website should sort of be a self-contained thing that occupies, a screen on your laptop and presents some engaging information. It's very similar to a slide presentation. Okay, now let's create some content here. First of all, we created this beautiful hero. So let's add that at the top of the page. We're going to call this Coding Camp. Super Fun 2024. Let's plan this event for next year. Then what do we want next? We've got 2 variations on a card list, rich text, and the contact form. Let's go with, first, let's go with like a list of speakers. And we'll say or let's call this talks. Like these are the conference talks. The first talk is going to be Pride and Prejudice. Let's put some of our favorite lorem in there. Yeah. And then we need an image for the speaker. I just uploaded some images a little earlier just so you didn't have to wait around while those uploaded. There's one. What's our next one? Let's say 1984. That one is definitely going to be an inspiring talk. Put some lorem in there. Speaker photo. And say speaker George Orwell. What else have we got? Let's have a talk called Wuthering Heights. A little bit of lorem. And a speaker photo. Emily Bronte. Please fill in your alt text when you're doing this. Let's do a couple more. We want this to look like a real website, right? Let's say Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Oh, that was wrong. By Virginia Woolf. There's our Virginia Woolf. And finally, who else we got here? This guy. Let's say Dracula by Bram Stoker. Again, wrong one. Nice to get this. Sorry about that. Nice to get this live rendering here, right? It was an unnecessary refresh. Okay. Nice to get this live rendering here, right? This rich text is okay, but it could definitely be better. Let's say, the only conference you'll ever need. And then put some lorem in there. Let's add another slice. This time, let's put in our contact form that we're working on. We're going to come back to this. Contact. You know I love my lorem. So now we got a contact form. And finally, let's do this nice wide card layout, which we love. And we'll do more lorem. Voluptate. My Latin, I'm trying to learn Italian, but my Latin's not very good. I'll be honest. Pelentescu. I hope I'm not saying anything offensive. I mean, you don't know, right? When you're speaking, when you're using lorem ipsum. Maybe lorem ipsum is offensive to someone. That would be disappointing. Aliquum melissuada. Maybe I got that right. Who knows? And I haven't used that one yet. All right, let's take a look at how our website's looking so far. Nice, we got this big hero. We got some talks listed here. We got some explainer text, contact form. Got some nice information here. I think this is starting to look pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with this. And then also just a reminder, we don't have to do it right now, but we do have the alternate layout for these cards. So if we wanted, we could put more cards in here. I think this is starting to look pretty cool. All right, now let's talk about the form. Right now, if I say sam@test.com, hello, and click submit, this is going to send it to my API endpoint, and then I'm going to get a full page refresh, which works. But we want to talk about polishing this experience a little bit, which sounds, I mean, I'll admit, when I first heard about the idea of like adding JavaScript to like default HTML behavior, that was pretty intimidating to me. SvelteKit makes it really nice. And by really nice, I mean, bear with me for 20 seconds, okay? Import, enhance from, somebody's gonna time me if I actually get this in 20 seconds. Oh no, typo. Import enhance from app.forms, use enhance. Was that 20 seconds? I think that was 20 seconds. Okay, remember what happened last time I clicked this button? We got a full page refresh. Wow, I'm really glad that worked. Okay, so we didn't get a full page refresh. The exact same thing happened. SvelteKit sent that form data to our API endpoint and handled it with the logic that we've provided. However, this time, because we're not using the default HTML behavior, it just updated the DOM for us with the response. That's right, it's the same thing happening in the back end, only it's not the default HTML behavior. It's Svelte's super secret sauce of JavaScript progressive enhancement, which is pretty wonderful. This is enhancement, it's progressive enhancement, which means that this will only happen if the JavaScript is available and working. If it's not available and working, it'll fall back to the default HTML behavior, which is like there anyway. It's an HTML form, which means no matter what, you can use it. So that's really wonderful. I mean, I will rant for days about progressive enhancement. I mean, I feel like developers assume that we have JavaScript available all the time, and it just makes you really appreciate how often you don't have JavaScript. I mean, it happens to me all the time. I live in an apartment with big, thick walls, and I often lose my internet connection. If you're on the train, or if you go through a tunnel, or if you're in an elevator, or maybe you have a firewall. You know, personally, sometimes I surf the web with JavaScript disabled because I find it annoying. Or maybe you have an ad blocker, which is blocking JavaScript. There are so many practical reasons why the average person wouldn't have JavaScript. And then beyond that, there are a lot of exceptional reasons why somebody wouldn't have JavaScript. You know, maybe they're using a device that you're not thinking of, or maybe they are on a really bad mobile network. Maybe they're living in a country that doesn't have great digital infrastructure, right? So by making your website JavaScript first, you're prohibiting a lot of people from using your app, or at the very least, you might be making it annoying for some people. By using progressive enhancement like this, you are making it accessible to everyone, which is good for everyone. And it's pretty amazing that SvelteKit makes that possible with, 11 characters? Let's say 50 characters, just to be conservative. Anyway, that's just one thing. Okay, so earlier on, when we created the endpoint for this form, which was at the root of our app in our page.server.js file, we wrote this success message, and this is totally arbitrary. We could have returned whatever we wanted here in this object. I chose to make it success true, just as a very simple message. And now, because we're using progressive enhancement, guess what? We can access that message, which is pretty cool. So let's start with something really simple. Page.form ? Have you submitted a form? Is there a form associated with this page? All right, well then, does that form have a success property, and is that success property true? Let's spell success correctly, no? Then let's render thank you with a happy sparkle emoji. If not, obviously, just the default submit message. And look, because SvelteKit uses hot module refreshing, it can see we've already submitted this form and it automatically updates it. We're going to have to actually refresh the page. We're going to have to do an old school refresh just to clear out that data so you can watch. Now, test.test.com. Hello. Remember, we've pre-programmed. Let's get back here. We've programmed in dev mode a 1 second delay here. 1 Mississippi. Pretty cool, eh? So that's one thing we can do. Let's get a little bit fancy though, because we're fancy people. Let's submitted equal false. So we're initializing a variable to keep track of the status of the form. And we're going to say on submit, submitted equals true. Let's clear this out again. Oh, no. We have to actually use it first. Let's actually do something with it. Let's go to the button. Disabled equals submitted. Now, hello. When we hit submit, it'll load. And now this button's disabled. I can't actually click this again. I'm getting more O's every time. I can't resubmit this form now. It's applied a disabled property for us, which we should actually, let's take a look. Can we actually see that property here? There you go, disabled, and Svelte optimizes it so that it just becomes a Boolean attribute rather than giving it like disabled equals true. Now let's take this a step further. We're gonna get even fancier. And we're gonna add a loading state to this button. This is getting into some nice Svelte reactivity, right? So we're going to use the $sign operator, which we explored earlier with our wide property. So we're going to use this to track some nested properties, which is our store, page.form.success. So what we're saying here is if no form has been returned, so for one reason or another, there's no success message, and the form has been submitted, then loading is true. So basically what we're saying, between the submission and the form coming back, we're going to have a loading state equal to true. Now let's update this. Page.form.success, thank you. Otherwise, loading, loading, and submit. Use Svelte's fancy class shorthand. It's the little things that make you fall in love, right? And this is something that I just find so wonderful about Svelte. They've created this little shorthand property, which says that if the variable is true, add a class to the element with the name of that variable. And that's it. It's that simple. So if submitted is true, we're going to have a class of submitted. And if loading is true, we're going to have a class of loading. So now we can use those classes to style our button conditionally based on our JavaScript logic, which is like, to me, I love CSS. I hate CSS frameworks. I don't know if you feel the same. I'm just like, I'm sure Tailwind is awesome. It's not my thing. I'm sure CSS and JS modules are great. I like writing classic CSS, and I like that Svelte lets me write classic CSS and do all this kind of fancy JavaScript enhanced CSS without having to think about JavaScript very much. That's just my personal preference. Maybe you feel the same, maybe you don't. Let me know in the comments. Anyway, so I've created these classes based on the conditional classes that we're dealing with. So I've got a loading class and a submitted class. And for the loading class, I've created a nice little animation. So let's take a look at how this looks. We're going to have to refresh, clear that out, test.test.com. Hello. And let's see what our button looks like now. There. Oh, isn't that soothing? Thank you. I disabled the cursor there. So now we've just got this plain button. It's so soothing. And you could do whatever you wanted. You could clear out this form altogether. You could display a bouquet, you know, because Svelte makes reactivity so easy. You have the form data, you have the message. You know, you could have like, you could send this to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT write you a haiku and send it back and display the haiku here, you know, and it would be so straightforward. Anyway, enough of my ranting about form handling in Svelte. Next, we're going to add a nav. So let's create a components directory inside our lib directory. We're, again, doing this inside lib because it's a good way to organize your code, and also lib gives us a nice alias that we can access from anywhere in our application, in our code base. So in lib, we're going to create a components directory, and in that directory, we're going to create a nav component. This is going to be the only pure component that we create. I mean, everything else we've created are slices, which are also components, but they're kind of special components. This is going to be the only plain component we create in our tutorial in this component framework. Make of that what you will. So I just copy pasted in some code here so you don't have to watch me write a nav. The main thing that you need to understand is that we're going to fetch some data from Prismic, which is going to be a nav document. It's going to have a list of links. We're going to iterate over those links, and for each one, we're going to render it using Prismic's Prismic link component from the Prismic Svelte library. And so we're just creating a bog standard nav with a list of links. So we're just creating a bog standard list of links, and then we're just adding some basic styling. We don't need to go too much into detail here. So this is all just some basic styling. You'll notice that we've got a type error here. That's because we're using a type that doesn't exist yet because I've just copy pasted this. We're going to hop back over to Slice Machine and create a new custom type. Make it a single type and just call it nav. So in Prismic, we use custom types to model arbitrary objects that you might use like partials, like reusable components that you might use across your website that aren't page UI. So like menus, navs, footers, the like. Here, let's just create a group and call it links. And in that group, we're going to add a link and call it link. Simple as can be. That's all there is to this model. And then we're going to use the key text field, which is just a string, to add a label for the link, and we're just going to call it label. Go to changes, push those changes there. And then let's go hop over to Prismic and create our nav document. So let's make that a link to our homepage. And then we'll do a link to the other page that's already populated here. We'll just pretend it's an about page. And then let's do like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, right? https://facebook.com. Open in a new tab. Label this Facebook. I think 5 links looks nice in a nav. I think it's a nice number. Instagram and a link to a web page. Open a new tab, Twitter. Save that, publish that. There we go. Now let's hop back over. We're going to go back to the root of our application. We have this layout.server.js file. We have this layout.server.js file. Currently, the only function of this file is to declare that our application is pre-rendered conditionally. And what that means is if SvelteKit is aware of any pages in your application, it will pre-render them, either because we explicitly tell them that those pages are there, or because it finds them through crawling your website. If it doesn't know about pages, then those pages will still be server rendered, which means that if for some reason you have a page that SvelteKit wasn't able to find when it was building, you won't get a 404. It won't pre-render that page, but when you try to access it, it will server render it, or at least it will try to server render it if possible. So this is nice. This is actually what makes our previewing functionality possible, which is why it's here. So please leave it here. If you remove this, the previews won't necessarily work. But now we're going to add a little bit more logic here, which is for our nav document. We're going to fetch our nav document at the root of our application in the layout. Something that I really like about SvelteKit is that you can do data fetching in your layouts, which is just very logical. And then we're going to go to the layout file, import our nav. Sorry, I'm just copy pasting here so you don't have to watch me type. Import our nav from components, and we're going to create a prop with export let data. So we have a data prop, and by default, the data prop is where your Svelte pages and layouts receive the data that they load. And then all we have to do is use our nav. Our nav has a links prop that we gave it. And we're going to just say links is data.nav.data.links. And that should give us a navigation. There we go. Super fun. Looking nice, eh? Ooh, I'm happy with this. Let's see how it looks in light mode, actually. I have this toggle dark mode. I just created a little toggled. I prefer the dark mode personally, but I think this is nice too. Yeah. Yeah, this is nice. All right, now let's just do a standard footer. We're going to use the section tag so that we get that nice alternating background that we coded earlier. And then just do like a copyright statement, right? I don't know if the copyright actually matters. I think more likely this is just kind of a nice graphic element, you know? It like is kind of a placeholder. There we go. We got the current date. I don't know if everyone does this. This is what I do. I always do date get full year, so I don't have to worry about updating my copyrights. Now let's take a step back and take a look at this. Look at how that just came together like that. Let's look at it in dark mode again. Nice. I like this. I think that this looks good. We could put some actual about content in there, but you know what? I'm going to leave that to you because I've taken you this far, but you know, there's so much you can do. I think that this is an incredibly productive tech stack. I really like this stack because I find that it takes care of so much of the plumbing and the wiring and the configuration and just lets me build and create and code and do UIs, which is, you know, what I find really fun here. I mean, I don't know if you noticed how delighted I was when we were creating this form because I just, you know, genuinely find this to be really cool. And so I hope you're feeling inspired to go out there and build some really cool things. I mean, I know I am. I really love this workflow. I think this is an awesome developer experience. So I'm hoping that you will take this as an opportunity to build something really cool, and 100% please share it with us, whatever social network you're on, LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub. You'll see the links below. Comment on this video to show us what you've built, or add us on Twitter, whatever. I'm at Sam Elfair, at Prismic.io. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay in touch. You'll see more Svelte content here. You'll see more awesome web developer content here, and you're going to see a lot more from Prismic in the coming months. So please be sure to stay in touch. We're really excited to see how all of this goes in the future.